Hello everyone, this is Majin-Boo speaking. Welcome to the Valentine's Day edition of the Bootleg Breakdown series. On this particular episode, what we're going to be looking at is going to be the Legend Creation take on the Evil Majin Buu SH Figuarts figure, which for I think it was about 20, no actually a little closer to 30ish, is a good deal cheaper than the real one, and we're about to figure out exactly why. Now in terms of the height check here, if you go by the tip of the head tentacle, whatever you want to call that thing, it stands at just around 8 inches tall, which seems reasonable enough at first, until you compare it with the real deal, which I actually happen to have here, and you then notice, like some of the other Legend Creation stuff, it's a good deal shorter than the real figure. Now if you're wondering why it's so much shorter, it's a combination of alternate joints which the bootleg tend to use, as well as parts being recasted, and recasts tend to be smaller, a smidge smaller than the real deal, and also a little bit of a rejiggering in terms of the upper torso, because, well, let's just say this figure's got some issues because of how they wanted to cheap out. As you can see, when trying to do the articulation test here, the arm comes right the hell off in this case, and as you can see, the elbow is doing something weird there. It doesn't have the full extension because it's not a proper Figuarts joint. It's actually just a ball joint. Very good color match, mind you, but it's not exactly the best fit in terms of articulation reach, and the shoulder is complete rubbish. Mine just keeps falling off in this case, as you can see. Even did so right out of the box. So, as we're going to just try to pop this on here, it's just really loose, just wants to come off on its own there. We look at the other shoulder and we can see, once again, no articulation for the butterfly joint. The butterfly joint is completely missing. In terms of back reach, it's a bit limited. Front reach has no real ab crunch whatsoever. It's very minimal. The legs have extremely limited motion, and that's because, unfortunately, just like the Vegeta figure, which was the last review, you're using different joints that don't have the right range. These are not proper Action 2.0 hip joints. As you can see on the real one, you have a pretty good set of splits on there, almost a full 108 or 90, whatever you want it. But here, not so much. The kneecaps technically have enough range, but you can tell there's something weird going on with the joints. They're just very low-grade version of what the real ones are, which leaves the joints to be a little more exposed than they should be. As you can see, this is a pretty good coverage here, but on the bootleg, not so much. And just again, if you have a general look, you can kind of see how the ankle joints should look on the real deal. And now let's compare them with the bootleg. Once I get this thing to stand up, even the real figure's a little hard to stand. As you can kind of see, the toe joints, they're not really functional. They're actually jammed because the pins have been screwed up on the toe joints. On both of the feet, at least in my case. And the ankle joints, while they do work, they're still a little harder to stand than they should be. So yeah, generally speaking, in terms of the range, you got some pretty bad range here, and that's because of all the different fake joints that are going on this particular figure. And it makes it even harder to stand than the real deal. As we're taking a look at the heads here, unfortunately it's worth noting that because of the ball peg and the undersized assorted bits on the bootleg here, things are not going to be interchangeable between real and fake figures, so unfortunately if you're looking for some alternate parts, you're not going to find them here. Speaking of parts though, here we have kind of the grimacing angry face in this case. In terms of execution, honestly it's handled well enough in this case. The paint detail and the eye decals tend to be a good fit on here, I find. Presentation wise, this figure is, not counting the joints, not too bad, to be totally honest on here. As we also look at the angry yelling face in this case, honestly really well handled. I actually really like how the heads are in this particular bit. And if you wanted to get these to fit on the real one, you actually have to mess around with the opening to do so, which is a bit annoying. As we have the arm fall off the upteenth time as we're trying to look at the hands here, you can kind of see from the way the wrist pegs are set up there. Once again, slightly undersized, so you'd have to do a little more wiggle room and kind of trailing things out if you wanted to steal the hands off this thing. Which, honestly, the hands aren't too badly handled. Not the way I wanted to word that, but still works in this case. If anything, the hands are maybe a little softer in detail than what the real figure have, and in terms of the pink color, everything is also a bit shinier because of the nature of plastic, but all in all, you're still not doing too bad here. They tend to fit well enough on this bootleg, and if you were to really open up or kind of extend the openings a bit, you probably could take the hands and put them on the real deal. Now, as we have, well, Boo pointing up on that one, we're going to take a look at some of the stuff for the other hands. In terms of hands, much like the real Boo, bootleg Boo here doesn't come with a ton of hands. He really comes with just what you had with the original finger here, or the original figure here, and that's not a lot going on. Kind of a closed fist, open hands, and one or two unique things on each end. which includes stuff like this kind of odd pointing finger in this case. It's kind of more like a bent pointing finger. Bit of a snug fit on that one, but it does work on here. Like I was saying, a bit snug. You really do need to force some of these hands on here because these things haven't been really perfectly casted, which is going to be a recurring theme with a lot of these Legend creation figures, it seems, as I'm going on time here. And once you do get on there, it does tend to stick in well enough. Now we're going to take a look at the Zenbu head accessory that comes with this bootleg, and unfortunately, if you were looking to pick up this bootleg to get a cheaper version of the Zenbu head, with the effect being that goes the antenna, that was the word I was looking for, not tentacle. Antenna was what I meant to say earlier. Unfortunately, in this case, it's not a good fit, quite literally in multiple ways. Namely because the effect piece doesn't actually want to fit on the ball of the antenna at all. The opening on the antenna, or on the ball piece, is actually too small. So you probably need to either drill it open a bit more, or you seriously need to heat up the joint in order to really squeeze it in there, and it might tear something when you try to remove it later. And of course that's not the only problem on this one. Namely, when you compare it with the real Zenbu head here on the side, you can see it's physically smaller by at least a good 10-15%. Which means also on the opening on the bottom, it's also going to be smaller by that same 10-15%, and you need to drill the opening a bit more in order to actually fit. So if you're looking to buy the bootleg in order to get a cheap version of this, you have some work to do, and if the quality of the plastic on mine is an indication, they didn't treat the Zenbu head with too much care, I'm afraid. So your mileage may vary on there. And now, because I call my video breakdown videos for a reason, here's what it looks like when you start tearing this thing apart. Once you start removing the shoulders, you can kind of see everything is kind of more pressure fit on there, where they don't have the ball pegs. So generally, that's part of the reason why these things don't tend to be interchangeable with the real ones, because they're using really cheap alternative versions of the joints in this case. As you can see, the shoulder pegs aren't true butterfly pegs, they're just ball pegs that are kind of holding everything in place, so much more limited motion, and admittedly, kind of hard to remove those ball pegs. Moving the head, and we remove the neck joint, which actually has very limited motion. I forgot to mention this earlier, and the reason it has limited motion is because the upper torso is too small to allow that motion. So from there we struggle a bit in order to try to get that upper part. We're actually going to start with the knees in this case. Technically it is a little more function. You can kind of see the kneecap does come off there, but that's not how the proper joint should look like, just for the record here. Ankle joints, admittedly, they're double-sided ball peg joints. That works easily enough. The hip joints come off here, and you can kind of see why it's the same limited articulation as Vegeta, actually. Only in my case, I'm just going to warn you, we're going to have some problem with those hips later, as I will include a small clip. And as we're removing the little side plates, you can kind of see the actual middle part of the hips there is about what you'd expect. Yeah, little ball here there. And in terms of the upper torso, you can kind of see everything is solid chunks of plastic or rubber, as opposed to the proper empty ones that should fit all the different articulation joints. And that's because they went cheap on the process here, to the surprise of no one. Here's those hip stitches I was talking about, namely, mine snapped when I was trying to reattach the figure after the fact. I just wanted to include this as a bit of footage here, just to show you that those hip joints are actually particularly weak. Unfortunately, as you can kind of tell from the quality issues I had on this particular figure, not to mention the breakage, I'm not going to recommend this one as a good substitute for the real deal. Fortunately, much like the Vegeta figure from our last review here, this thing suffers from being undersized compared to the real deal. In this case, much more noticeably so, at least a good half an inch, I would say, or half a head height at least. And in terms of the joint quality, the much cheaper joints lead to a more limited articulation range on everything, not to mention things being more fragile, especially around the hips. Apparently that's not an uncommon problem with this particular figure. So all in all, I'm going to have to say, avoid this particular bootleg, save your money on that one. And in terms of the other ones, unfortunately the complaints you see here, they're going to continue, but we're going to follow that up on our next video. Catch you all later for now.